The following is a conversation with William Cromarty. He is the CEO and founder at Kirkwall, the president and CEO at Heath Company, and former CIA. This is the Problematic Podcast, where I interview leaders who are solving critical problems and driving positive change. Tune in every Wednesday to hear from a visionary business leader. And now here's William Cromarty. Let's get started. So, could you explain your company, Kirkwall, a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So, Will Cromarty, CEO and founder of Kirkwall. At Kirkwall, we're focused on defending America's critical infrastructure. So we do that for a variety of sectors, everything from ag tech to utilities to autonomous systems and drones. Heavy industry, really anything that's got some kind of data feed will tell you if something is going wrong or ahead of time if it's going to go wrong in a predictive sense as well.
Okay, so what specific problem are you solving with that company?
Yeah, so I'd say probably a couple different problems. One of them is that there's a lot of critical infrastructure out there that is wildly underdefended and is not even being monitored. And that's something that increasingly over time actually becomes a national security threat as well. So a
Okay,
lot of our team came out of the national security sector previously, spent a lot of time briefing bad news to policymakers about how vulnerable different equipment and infrastructure was, and so decided to found a company to fix that. So for us, it's kind of a combination of helping reduce a very expensive downtime for a lot of these sectors, but also defending them in a security context.
okay. So is the lack of cybersecurity in America, is it a big problem or what's it look like?
Yeah, so I'd say definitely a huge issue, and that's something that the director of the NSA actually made a statement about that about a week or two ago here, specifically about how foreign adversaries like China have already penetrated a lot of these systems. And so, if you look at conflicts like Ukraine and how one of the very first things that got attacked was critical infrastructure and power grids and utilities, I think that's something that is definitely a concern, especially because for a lot of these industries early on, maybe a decade or so ago, they connected a lot of things to the internet that maybe shouldn't have been connected to the internet at the time, and it opened up a lot of different vulnerabilities.
Okay. So could you fill us in a little bit more on your backstory and how you got to Kirkwall and everything along the way to Kirkwall?
Yeah, so former intelligence officer by background with the Central Intelligence Agency from 2015 to 2020. Went private sector after that and got into the aerospace sector. And there were a couple of us that left around that time. I think we felt as if we were briefing more bad news than we were fixing. So it was a lot of meeting with U.S. policymakers and kind of giving the doom and gloom briefing about different vulnerabilities and how our adversaries may be catching up to us in certain regards. And so I think for us, we saw some really good opportunities in the aerospace sector initially to fix those problems we used to brief. I think after years of being on these different panels and speaking at conferences and saying someone should really fix this and having the whole panel agree, I realized we actually had a great team of people that had worked together previously that could start addressing some of these challenges. So we founded the company formally in November of 2022, went full time on that in it was about April or May of the following year, and have been full time since then. And the team more than tripled over the last month or two here. So definitely a lot of good expansion going on at the moment.
That's really cool. So are they all on location?
So we've got three different primary locations right now. So we've got Sioux Falls, Fargo, and Grand Forks, and our team is pretty much distributed between those three at the moment.
Okay. So could you tell us a little bit more about the inspiration behind starting Kirkwall?
Yeah, so I think in addition to wanting to fix those problems we used to brief, I think probably the big push that I needed personally as an entrepreneur, right around that April timeframe was, I was running business development for an aerospace company at the time. Um, the entire company suddenly got notified overnight that the parent company had declared financial insolvency, all operations terminated effective immediately across 6 countries. And I founded Kirkwall on paper, done some consulting work at the time, but I think maybe that was the divine intervention that I needed to actually run and go full time with it. And so
Okay.
me and my co-founder decided that that was the push we needed. We're going to go full time, see how long we could survive for. You live off your savings for the first couple of months until you actually get revenue coming in, and
Yeah.
somehow we pulled it off, and now the company's growing.
Awesome. So how do you recommend someone getting a good co-founder like how you have?
Yeah, so I think it's much more about personality traits and temperament than anything else. And I think there are a lot of those traits that I saw in my co-founder that made me want to work with him. I think one was being able to quickly pivot from failure. So if something in your life doesn't work out, being able to quickly pivot to a new approach. I think that's critical for entrepreneurs. A lot of the biggest companies in history today are doing nothing related to what they were founded for. If you look at, YouTube was originally supposed to be a dating service, right? And that's why they even incorporated video content so you could introduce yourself to whoever you wanted to go on a date with. And eventually it actually became what we see today. But I think there are a number of different companies like that. I mean, Play-Doh was invented as a wallpaper cleaner, right? And it was meant to remove smudges from your wallpaper. And it turned out the creators' kids loved playing with it. And it was also non-toxic, and so it actually turned into a children's toy, right? And so I think there are dozens of stories like that about different businesses that pivoted. So I think that ability to pivot is critical. I think the ability to quickly figure things out, if you don't have the answer to something, to quickly figure out what other people have done and how you could do something similar. And I saw similar traits like that as a co-founder. So I think it was much more about how someone performs under pressure and how they pivot, more so than any individual technical skill set.
What advice do you have for the average entrepreneur who's trying to learn how to pivot a little bit better?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things that I've seen is just because something appears to be a failure doesn't mean it actually is. And so, just going to other examples of companies like that. If you look at when 3M developed Post-it notes, they were trying to develop the next super glue, and it turned out they invented what they thought was actually a failure of a glue that didn't stick to things very well. But then all of a sudden they said, hey, maybe there's a market for this, and the ability to stick a piece of paper to a wall without damaging the wallpaper actually might be nice for people. And so Post-it notes were born. So I think, you can point to a lot of examples like that where just because something didn't go well initially doesn't mean that you throw it out. You actually might think about how you can repurpose that, and who else it might be relevant to. And I think part of that too is looking at where your early traction is. So if you're getting tons of traction in a field that you didn't initially focus on, it actually might be that you pivot to that.
So was there a point in your career that you've had to pivot like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with my previous employer going out of business overnight and all of a sudden saying, am I going to look for another job, or what am I going to do? Am I going to found my own company and run with this? I think that was definitely one where I felt like I had to pivot. And even since founding Kirkwall, we've pivoted more than once. We initially were planning on being very narrowly focused on cybersecurity for drones, like traditional flying UAV drones. I think one of the things that we found was that that market, there's still tons of potential there, but it's still growing. And we were getting more early traction in kind of heavy industry, ag tech, and a couple other related sectors. And so we ended up pivoting to focus on where we were getting that early traction.
Okay. So could you share a story of like a big challenge that you faced and how you overcame it?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, when we were trying to feel out where we were going to get that traction the most, and we just weren't getting the traction we were looking for in that UAV sector, one of the best things we did actually was we enrolled in the very first cohort of the I-Corps program, which is through the National Science Foundation. And it was the very first cohort they did at the Great Plains Hub, in the Dakotas. And so I think the reason that was critical for us there was it was dozens of customer discovery interviews, and ultimately when we'd speak with customers, they'd say yes, we care about cybersecurity, but there are 20 other things we want to monitor too, and we got all these dashboards from 20 different providers. It's driving us nuts. Can we just get a single centralized dashboard where you can tell us not only is there some kind of cyber threat, but also just is there a mechanical failure that's going to cost us $1 million and light something on fire tomorrow? And they said, we want to know that too. And so I think for us, that customer discovery process was critical, and I'm really glad we did it. And it probably saved us because that's where our early traction came from.
Right. Okay. So on a different subject, you've been named to the Prairie Business 40 under 40, and you hold a lot of different positions on different boards. What strategies have helped you build a successful career like that at a pretty young age?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, especially as a founder, is you should actually consider it one of your duties to help other founders, and to actually you like literally every single day think about what you're doing to help other founders. And I think for me, one of the best things I did there was just be kind of a connections broker. And if I see two people that I think need to meet, I introduce them. I probably make at least 5 to 10 introductions a day for other founders. And I consider that actually a really important part of being an entrepreneur and a founder is connecting other people. And I think it's not only the right thing to do, it also comes back and benefits you later on. And you never know, who you help out early on, and 5 years later, all of a sudden you're doing business together. So I think being kind of a central hub for people that should meet each other and helping to put the smart people in a room together, I think is one of the best things you can do.
That's the advice you have for people to accelerate their career.
Yeah, I think kind of just constantly thinking about who can I introduce. All of a sudden, that's the kind of thing that you kind of become that central figure that gets people in front of each other. And I think especially if you're doing that in a way that helps other people, all of a sudden people start inviting you to be on boards and other stuff just because they say, hey, this is someone that can help the organization. They're great at making introductions. They'll put us in front of the people that we need. And I think if you're doing that purely with the goal of helping other people versus treating every person as a sale you're trying to close, I think it pays dividends later on to just help other people without any expectation of it coming back to you.
Okay. So would that be your biggest piece of advice for networking?
Yeah, I'd say so, right? And I think especially, like I know you posted the other day about kind of networking faux pas and advice, and and that question of as a young entrepreneur, what should you do there? I think one of the key elements there is just is kind of be a human, treat other people like humans. Don't walk in and immediately shove business cards on people. I think at a lot of those networking events, the death of every one of those networking events is when people show up and start cold pitching everyone and shoving cards on them, and everyone else says, "I'm never going back to that thing. That was terrible." So I think when I've seen successful founders events like what we're launching in Sioux Falls right now, for those meetups, it's you must be a founder, but also you're not allowed to cold pitch anyone, and you'll get thrown out if you cold pitch people. And I think that's one of the best things you can do is to do that. And I think also I'm a big fan of creating spaces where founders can interact with other founders, because I think that's critical when you're first getting up and running. And one of the reasons is in your life you might have people that love you and support you and want to see you do well, but they might not understand that founder experience. And at the end of the day, whether you're founding a software company or a bakery, you still need someone to do your taxes. You still need an accountant, and you'll be looking to other entrepreneurs for that advice.
Right. So in difficult times, how do you maintain optimism and drive forward?
Yeah, so I would say I'm a big fan of the concept of a calling, right? And I mean that theologically, right? The idea that it's not just a coincidence that you're working in a certain field, right? That you actually want to align that with what you're supposed to do with your life, right? And so I think for me, when I look at the kind of habits that really have been beneficial there, right? It's not just your traditional diet and exercise, right? But it's also for me, like daily Bible reading, right? Like having that kind of connection that reminds you why you're doing something and what you're building towards. I think if you don't have something like that, you're going to burn yourself out as an entrepreneur.
Okay. So I know we've talked about it before, but what are different ways that you would prevent burnout, or ways you have prevented burnout in your life?
And I think it's one that I'm still working on, and I have not perfected this at all. But I think um, a couple of the things that I found that have been helpful. Part of it is being intentional about scheduling, and I'm trying to get better on this right now. Actually, it's setting aside time in the beginning of my week to plan out the week ahead. Also, if you have at least one day of your week where you just don't schedule meetings, right? Unless it's a true emergency, but even then, just try and have one day free. So just don't do meetings on Wednesdays, for example. Um, I think that's been beneficial. Also, reduce your average meeting time from 60 minutes to 30 minutes when you send someone an invite. That's been good because if you only have 30 minutes, people get to the point, and meetings will fill the amount of time that you allot them. I think a lot of people have had the experience of people saying, well, we got the conference room for an hour, so what do you guys want to talk about? And all of a sudden now you got 20 minutes extra tacked onto that meeting that you didn't need.
Right.
So I think being intentional about scheduling, and then I've also had to force myself to take time off. And for me, I realized if I don't put night off in my calendar and actually block it off like it's a calendar invite, I won't do it. I'll end up checking my phone or sending work emails. So I think forcing yourself to take time off like that is good. Um, and I'd say another thing that most founders are terrible at, myself included, is celebrating wins. And so I think finding ways to actually celebrate your wins and look back and say, hey, we had a great week or we had a great month as a company. We're going to take some time off. We're going to go out and get some drinks and celebrate this win, right? I think forcing yourself to do that is important. And that's one of the reasons why when we do these founders meetups, um, we ask three questions, which is, what's your name? What's your business, in a sentence or two? And what's a win you're celebrating this week, either personal or professional? Because people will never celebrate their wins unless we make them do it.
Right. So what's the win you had this week?
Oh, let's see. I scheduled a night off on my calendar. I made myself take a night off and not look at my phone, and that's hard for me to do. And I, at various times I've been better than others at it, but I think that was one. We also found two more great candidates for the team, so I think we'll probably expand the team even further. So that's kind of a professional win there. And then getting married in under 90 days, and things are actually moving along well for that. So feeling not too stressed about the wedding too.
Awesome. So, what is some advice you have for a leader who's trying to make a impact in the world?
Yeah, and I would say really focus first on that calling element, right? And think about not just what can I do, but what am I supposed to do, right? Like what am I intended to do? What is the reason I was created? Right? I think that becomes a much deeper question. And even if you haven't figured it out, yeah, that's totally fine, right? That can be a lifelong process, and it pivots and changes over time. But I think that's something that I feel like is missing in the discussion in modern society a lot of the time these days is not just what are my career options and how do I make more money, but also what am I supposed to do and how does that actually benefit other people, right? And I think I've best heard that concept of a calling described as the intersection between your greatest gift and the world's greatest need. And I think if you can align that to either your career, your volunteering, your personal life, right, then I think that helps reduce burnout too.
Okay. So, what do you feel like your calling is?
So I'd say for me, I think it's something that I feel like has pivoted over time, right? And I think first, for me, for a long time, I felt that calling was serving as an intelligence officer, right, and defending America in that context. And I think ultimately, the more that I served in that role, and then ultimately saw ways that we can improve our national security, including through the private sector, and the American aerospace sector, it pivoted to defending America in that private sector context. So I'd say still kind of in that broader realm of national security, but specifically founding a company to do it when I saw a gap that wasn't being filled.
What advice would you give to a different entrepreneur who's trying to find their calling?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first part is being good at listening, right, and in listening for what that seems like. And I think for me, two really influential texts for me were Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis and then The Confessions of St. Augustine, right? And I think that element of looking for, what does guidance in your life look like, right? What does it look like to be pointed towards something, right? And I think also the self-awareness of, if all of a sudden a ton of doors are closing in your life or a ton of doors are opening in your life, paying attention to that, right? And if it seems like it's too many to be coincidental, then that's probably the case. And so I think just kind of the self-awareness of looking at the opportunities that are either opening or closing and then figuring out why.
Okay. And then we talked about this before too, but what drives you to do all these different things?
Yeah, I think in terms of what I find rewarding in any role I'm in, I want to feel like I'm learning something new every day, and I want to feel like what I'm doing is good for America, right? And I think those are really the two things. And if I've ever been in a role where one of those two or both aren't satisfied, then I leave. Um, and I have no regrets about doing that. So I think I've left jobs in the past because I felt like either I was no longer learning or it wasn't sufficiently advancing that mission of helping the United States. And so I think there's a lot of value in almost having those internal red lines of what you find rewarding. Because I think if you don't have those, you see people get stuck in a role for 10 years or 15 or 20 years. And, their justification is, well, I got a pension coming and, there will be a nice retirement check coming. But at the end
Yeah.
of the day, you burn your whole career not feeling satisfied. And I think you, you want to be comfortable walking away from something if it's not meeting your career needs.
Okay. What advice would you give to a entrepreneur to become mentally sharp? Because I know you're definitely mentally sharp and you know how to memorize stuff and gather data. So, what's your advice?
In terms of mental sharpness, I feel like a lot of that actually comes from physical well-being too, right? And it's not just the obvious stuff like getting sleep. But I think it's also, there's really interesting research on how gut health relates to mental wellness, right? And it's stuff like that you wouldn't expect, right? But it's stuff that factors into diet and exercise. I think also just getting a really diverse exposure to a lot of different data sources, even things that have nothing to do with your field, right? Or go get coffee with people professionally that have nothing to offer you professionally. You're not trying to close a sale, and no one's selling anything. Just so you get the opportunity to talk to someone who's in a totally different field. I feel like just getting that wide range of exposure is actually really helpful.
Right. Okay. So, what paradigm was absolutely shattered when you joined the CIA?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me is sometimes there's stuff that we don't know, right? Like I think you walk in with the assumption that the government or the military or intelligence agencies, knows everything, and some stuff just isn't public. And I think as much as there is, information out there that's not public, sometimes we just don't know what happened, right? And I think that's almost frustrating or surprising, right? And I think it's sometimes that it even scares people at times to know that at the moment no one might know what's going on in a certain situation. And obviously, you keep trying to figure it out over time, and you deploy intelligence assets to do that, right? And there are ways that you try and resolve that, but sometimes it's just surprising how much we don't know.
Okay. So, what was your favorite part of being in the CIA?
I mean, obviously, it was exciting and rewarding in terms of meeting those two standards for learning new things every day and doing what's good for America, right? So I think for me, it was those were both really rewarding for me. I think sometimes getting an inside look at different international affairs, especially if the news reporting hasn't been accurate, seeing what's actually happening behind the scenes, I think has been good. It also makes you skeptical of a lot of different publications out there when you see the difference between people rushing to publication and publishing things that are rumors or falsehoods.
Yeah.
So it makes it a lot harder to trust any one media source, which is a lot of people ask what should I read, what can I trust out there, and it's kind of you read about 20 of them, and none of them are going to be perfect, and none will be accurate all the time, and you make your best effort, but there's no perfect media source out there that's always honest.
Right. So, how big of a problem do you think misinformation is in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say definitely a concern, and I think the concern is that politically you'll see both sides think that only the other side is falling for misinformation, and everyone is affected by it. It's targeted at everyone. America's adversaries, right? Whether it's Russia, China, Iran, anyone, are intentionally putting disinformation out there, and they're often good at it. And they will target all sides of the political spectrum. They'll, literally everyone gets targeted just in different ways. So I think there's self-awareness that's required there, where it's not just the people you disagree with that are falling victim to it.
Right. Okay. Would you recommend any news sources or anything that keeps misinformation to a low?
I'd say one of the better ones is the Wall Street Journal. So I think what I've seen with the Wall Street Journal is they, generally speaking, are good at verifying sources and information, and not sprinting to publication if they hear a rumor. And I think that's the challenge is in the 24-hour news cycle, a lot of media sources will just try and break the story first before they even know if it's true. And I think Wall Street Journal, I feel like they do a little bit better due diligence than a lot of others out there.
Okay. Well, that's cool. So, how can listeners get involved and support your mission?
Yeah, so I'd say for us, we've built out some pretty exciting capabilities, and now we're looking for anyone in heavy industry, ag tech, autonomous systems that has access to interesting data sets. So for us, that could be anything from data sets coming off of smart building automation sensors to medical equipment to autonomous tractors. We're really looking to partner with those equipment manufacturers so that we can build out some really nice use cases and say, here's a way that we detected this system was about to fail a week ahead of time and then saved them $1 million in unplanned downtime. So I think for us, anyone touching on any of those topics, we'd love to just have that conversation and see if there's something cool we can do together.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, William. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.